Okay, the simplest way to think about the way migration relates to development is to think at what has happened over the centuries with people moving from the countryside into cities. And that's been a phenomena very common in different countries as the economies changed and opportunities were made available in the cities, or maybe because younger generations for the first time had the opportunity to study and so wanted to leave perhaps agricultural work, and sometimes also for not so good reasons, say, problems with land drying out and jobs not being available anymore in villages and in the countryside. And so the way cities have become the hub of economic and social development over the centuries. Now imagine the same kind of phenomena happening, with the main difference being that there is a border in between. So we're talking now about migration as people moving between countries, but it's fundamentally the same phenomenon of people moving from one place to another, typically in search of opportunities for better employment, to go to better schools, to find opportunities for their children, or perhaps because relatives live, to be closer to relatives, for example. So these are all examples of aspects of the development process to which moving contributes to. So from that perspective, migration and moving is a strategy for development, is a form of development, sometimes a choice, sometimes a necessity. And from that perspective, it's neither good or bad. It's just something that, is part of human nature to make decisions to maximize the potential to achieve certain objectives. And again, typically work, family, education, better health, better lifestyles, better conditions, and generally opportunities is what people search for. So migration and development go hand in hand, and they can have an impact on one another. They can be both positive or negative, depending on the circumstances and the policies and in the context where this takes place. Mm-hmm. Well, it's politically not very viable, I think, in most countries in the world. I think these questions about the idea of, that migration is either open borders for all or closing border for most people is just not a realistic way of looking at it. People have always moved and they'll continue to move. The fact that more people have the opportunity to do so, have money, have information, means of transportation are becoming much more accessible. That technologies means that people have access to information much quicker than they used to, means that we're going to see more people wanting to move, not necessarily for a long period, not forever, perhaps as a temporary choice. And so the way countries need to think about it is not as a matter of principle, as whether you let everybody in or you keep everyone out, but much more look at what are the needs of labour markets, what are the demographic trends, what are the profiles of different people that are interested in coming to the country, the different skills that are needed. I come from Italy, where there is a very clear need, for example, for migrant workers to contribute to social care, and particularly to the care of the elderly, as there is a very, a rapidly growing aging population. So it's a pragmatic issue, and it's a matter of policy choice. And every country, and for that matter, every city or different countries in a region, make decisions based on what makes sense for them and for the neighbouring countries. So this is a phenomenon that we're all still trying to understand, and I think has caught a number of people by surprise. And there are some common features of what's happened in a number of countries in Europe, but also beyond, obviously in the United States. And as we speak, there are riots in the streets in all sorts of, in all different countries of the world, from Lebanon to Chile. I think it's fair to say that migration has played into the politics of this unrest. This unrest has not necessarily been, to begin with, a problem of migration. I think we are looking at the failure of aspects of globalization, the fact that extreme inequality, for example, in the country where I live, in the UK, has led to the very difficult debate around the membership of the European Union. And immigration and migration has been brought in this context as a little bit of a shortcut by politicians, particularly during electoral campaigns, to say, to focus on a problem that it's, that makes, that provides anxiety to people, with this idea that if only we can tackle migration and stop people coming our way, all those issues will be resolved. And that's fundamentally a lie. And it's shown itself to be a lie, because typically when some of these right-wing parties have been elected, they rarely manage to stay in power and to deliver on the promises. Italy being a good example, with Salvini being quite rapidly ousted once he pushed a little bit too far on the single issue of immigration in his program of government. So I think there are lots of we are observing changes in and unrest in different parts of the world. I think in some cases immigration debate has played into it. In the main has been a choice of politicians to fuel the anxieties that people legitimately have, particularly when the phenomenon of so-called irregular migration and people coming without any sense of this being a regulated and controlled system is happens to be the case in a number of places. Well, the key is that the answer cannot be migration policies alone. It's interesting that in the political debate we keep going back and forth about what to do about the borders. It's been fascinating in the UK to see this determination to end the free movement of migrants from Europe. Whether to let boats dock in ports in Italy, and so on and so forth. Well, whereas the solution to maximize unlocking the potential of human mobility to achieve income, education, health, and the costs that are associated with that are clearly related to a number of policy areas. It's a matter of labour policies with the changing nature of work and the fact that the future of work will look very different from what we're used to now, and labour markets need to adapt to it. And part of that is a different way of thinking about attracting talents from different parts of the world. It's a matter of the sustainability of social services, particularly in countries where there is a growing proportion of population that is old, aging, that cost the system. So in that, the issue around migration is related to the contribution that migrant workers can make, but also the potential costs that they bring to the welfare state, particularly, say, when there are large refugees population that require protection and social care. So the key, in my mind, is to stop looking at those issues from a migration angle and pretending or assuming that the way to address these problems is to change migration policy, typically to restrict migration policies and to increase border control as the main answer, and focus much more on the real problems at hand that relate to work, the future of work and labour markets, sustainability of basic service, of social services and basic services, natural resources, climate change being a factor that contributes to human mobility, another critical area that matter for the future of humanity, of which migration is a strategy to achieve change, if only we get our head around it in much more pragmatic and less ideological and politically driven ways.